Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, I'm going to talk about some things that are a little bit on the lighter side, but actually are not. We're going to talk about using humor to drive inclusion and belonging at work. Because you know what? Let's face it, DEI has gotten a bad rep this year. It's a lot of a hard conversation. And so let's talk about where humor could be used in the right way to start opening up people to have conversations about these things that are very prevalent in the workplace. So my special guest today, his name is Aaron Fung, and I'm so excited for you guys to meet him. He's the head of inclusion and belonging for the Americas at WSA Audiology, one of the world's largest hearing aid manufacturers. He also runs Inclusion AF, serving Fortune 200 clients, and Coaching AF, where he guides mid-career professionals towards career clarity. Now, previously, Aaron led the DEI initiatives at Pinterest and also held roles at LinkedIn, Deloitte, and Merrill Lynch. He's a proud dad too, also an avid traveler, an autism inclusion advocate, and dabbles a little in stand-up comedy. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Aaron Fung. Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Mary. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. And I feel like this is a hard topic to get right because anytime I think about, utilizing humor in a slightly off-color way, all it makes me think of is like, well, you're just going to get HR called on you, aren't you? You got to traverse very carefully, right?
I'm fortunate in that I like awkward conversations. I like difference, and that makes this job particularly a good fit for me. But I think the balance between humor and DEI is a very tough one to navigate for most people. So hopefully our conversation today will illuminate what I try, what I don't always succeed at, and then occasionally what works for me.
Yeah. And, unless you've been under a rock for the last couple of years, let's go ahead and simplify what DEI stands for people.
Yeah, I think diversity, equity, inclusion is what the acronym is, but I think it has been made to represent something that it isn't. When I actually ask people, like, what does DEI mean? I actually want them to answer. And some people understand the acronym. Some people understand the underlying concepts. And other folks have used it essentially to vilify a set of ideas that they don't agree with, right?
Yeah.
The underlying principles, though, are really about making opportunities for groups that have historically not had them, that have been excluded, that have not had the ability to ascend or grow within an organization or have the same business opportunities as other groups. So I hope that more people will see it as that, as opposed to just being a boogie word or some kind of four-letter word type deal.
Yeah. And you can't deny the fact that when there is a diverse crowd around a decision table, you're going to innovate faster than if everybody thinks the same exact way. I mean, bottom line, right?
Well, and I acknowledge that if you have a homogenous group, you get things done faster. Is it the right thing that gets done faster, right? Are there potential risks or consequences that you're not envisioning? And your statement you just said a second ago, I absolutely agree with. I think that the ability to have different perspectives prevents big disasters, prevents bad launches. And when people aren't in the room to voice those kinds of perspectives, inevitably companies, people, functions, and teams, run into those unforced errors, self-inflicted errors.
Now we've got a global audience, and I'm super curious if anybody outside of the States, really thinks of DEI as this buzzword hotspot kind of thing as in America. In America, this word has really gotten politicized. So, Aaron, why humor? What role does humor play in making conversations about inclusion and belonging more approachable and impactful?
So I should probably share a little bit about my background. Like when I was a kid, I was very actively involved in stage theater, musical theater, public speaking. The last time I did stand-up comedy was about almost 20 years ago. But I've always found that people enjoy laughter and joy. It sounds so basic, but DEI work, I think, oftentimes is driven by compliance or punitive punishment. And just think about human behavior. Like no one thrives in an environment where you're constantly being punished, but also no one does well in an environment where there's no accountability or no responsibility. As I got into the space, based on my interests and fascination with, difference and dimensions of difference, I started asking, is it going to help anybody if all I do is run up to someone and slap them on the wrist and say, no, you are
Hmm.
racist, or you are misogynist, or you are ableist? There are situations where you have to, right? That's absolutely true. But if there's a way to get people to feel something that makes them more curious, empathetic, and open to new perspectives, that is always a more effective way of changing behavior. And
Hmm.
at its core, that's what we're trying to do. There is a set of behaviors essentially built upon lack of perspectives or assumptions that have made for an environment where people feel like I don't belong, or
Mm.
someone said something stupid to me, or someone made an assumption about my cultural heritage or my holiday or something that's not true, right? And
Hmm.
so I look at humor as a mechanism to get people to feel a certain way. I'll give you an example, right? How people feel about you sets up a lot of what they will trust you with or engage you on. For a few years, whenever I'd start a new job, I would literally start every job with bringing a tray of brownies to the office. And one of my colleagues, a couple months later asked, "Why did you do that?" I said, "Do you remember what your first impression of me was?" She's like, "Yeah, you brought me brownies." "What does brownies do to you?" She's like, "Makes me happy." And I just smiled at her, and she starts laughing because she says, "You're manipulative." I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm setting my first impression because I want it to be positive. If I wanted it to be negative, I'd insult you based on characteristics you can't change." And she's like, "That's a little intense." But she got it because I wanted that good impression. I also just love brownies, and quite frankly, if I make a whole pan, I'll eat them all. So if I make a pan and I split it with six new people, guess what? I get my brownie. I don't eat 4,000 calories in one sitting.
So everyone just took away, make brownies in the first 90 days of a new job.
And
Make it a
Aaron is a manipulator. I'm like, that's fine. If that's what you think, that's fine. But you still got a brownie and you still liked it. And they're like, that's true. It's true.
Well, here's what I picked up from what you just said as well. The keyword in all of that is trust. You're building trust right from the first jump. You're building that foundation, and I think that that's really a key doing this and doing this right, because you can't walk into a room and no one knows you and no trust, and then start making jokes off the fly that you don't know if they're going to land or not, right?
I mean, for most people, yes. Certainly, if you were a professional comedian or a professional speaker and you were brought into a sales kickoff or a team training, you might already have enough credibility based on your reputation or based on what
Mm.
you've been brought in for. But yeah, I think that if you're, for example, new to an organization, you haven't earned that trust or that organizational credibility yet. And this is where I tell everyone who's asked, like, how do you blend DEI and humor? You have to get to a place where people understand what you know, what you
Mm.
care about. And if they've got that trust in you, then I think it gives you a little more license to use humor as a mechanism or as a tool. But coming straight out with deadpan humor or cringe humor in your first 5 minutes of meeting the team, yeah, you can do that. There will be consequences for that, and some consequences that you might not want as you join a new team.
Yeah, because it's hard to make a first impression twice, right? It's
Right.
hard to rewrite what the initial impression is of you, which I think leads into my next question is, how to read the room. How do you know whether humor will land well with your colleagues and if it's best to maybe take a different approach? Because sometimes humor is perfect to sort of crash into the weird air that's in a meeting room, but
Yeah.
other times, you want to be a little bit more sensitive. How do you read the room?
And I know this is different for different people, right? For example, some folks who maybe have a different ability to understand interpersonal dynamics, it might be much harder, right? But I kind of tell people, think about like radar or how a bat flies, right? It has the ability to map out the room, and what you look for in a room is who's in that room, what are their roles, what are their perspectives, and you may not know people's history, experience, lived or otherwise,
Mm.
that they're bringing into that room. But the first step, I think, is thinking about positional power. And I think a lot of people who have positional power don't think about it because they've taken it for granted. So, for example, your gender might give you positional power. Your wealth might give you positional power. If, for example, I were to go into a women's ERG and crack jokes from the very first moment, it might not be received well because, again, maybe there is a positional power element in society, right? And so I think that positional power is a starting point, and then it becomes understanding, if I were to use humor in the situation, how would this group receive it? Now, it's a loaded question because someone who doesn't have that awareness of the other group's experience is not going to understand how it's going to land poorly if it does land poorly, right? And so I tell everyone to think about, if you don't have that perspective, like, I don't know how this group would respond, get it. Get it in advance. Do your research. Because if you understand the backgrounds of people in the room, the delivery of humor or a compliance presentation or a communication strategy becomes so much easier because you're using the vocabulary they're familiar with. You're making references that they get along with or that they would recognize. And this is where I don't think enough people do this, but to know who's in the room is not particularly hard. You ask someone for a list. You look them up on LinkedIn. Oh, this person went to, the College of William and Mary. Oh, I was in Williamsburg for a wedding. We can make a connection over, taking those goofy photos with those, 3-point hats, right?
Yeah.
And again, I think this is why people sometimes struggle. It's like they don't know what's in the room, so their radar is off. They go into it blind, and then inevitably they shoot themselves in the proverbial foot, right?
And I imagine, to your point earlier, a stand-up comedian will do that kind of research, knowing going into that particular club. A club in Brooklyn is going to have a very different audience than a club in the Upper West Side, right?
Absolutely. And you can't obviously plan for everyone in that group because there's still going to be variations in the crowd. But if you're doing a show in Omaha or in Louisville, that's different than doing a show in San Francisco or Seattle, right? And you can also adjust your comedy to match the audience because there are jokes that will land in San Francisco making fun of tech people that wouldn't make as much sense being in Tulsa. And that ability to know what's relevant to the audience shows you've done your homework. It also makes you more credible because references like that always make it so that people think, oh, you understand what this place is or who we are better than someone else who makes a joke that doesn't land.
And I think that these are innate skills for people that, think about in the workplace, people who you consider are great presenters, who maybe are charming or charismatic or excellent storytellers. This is a skill that I think is a discipline. It's a muscle that's trained over time that, it's not to say that everybody can or nobody can do it, only the people who have these innate skills. But I think it is a muscle. You learn to go into every meeting prepared, know your audience, know yourself, know what it is that you're trying to get across to this audience and what the key decision or action you want them to make, right?
Yeah. I think it absolutely is a muscle. And I think, when I was telling, I went back into doing an open mic comedy night this week for the first time since 2008. And one or two of my friends basically made the same comment, which was, I can't believe you're going into that kind of environment. Public speaking is one of the hardest things that anyone can do, much less to do it in a performance capacity, and then to try to make people laugh on top of that. And my response was, well, it's not like I'm going in with no practice. Like, I practice by testing jokes out of my friends. I practice when, I'm on stage for a different event in front of 50 people or 2,000 people. And that ability to keep practicing in spite of failure, in spite of jokes that don't land or presentations that aren't effective or don't result in a sale or don't persuade people, that's what helps me get better.
Yeah.
And I ask people, what have you done in life and gotten good at that hasn't come through some kind of struggle? Oh, you were an Olympic swimmer. Yeah. Were you at that caliber within the first 5 minutes of jumping in the pool? No. How many 5 a.m. wake-up calls did you go through to get in the pool early, and swim for 2 hours before school to get your backstroke time down? And I think once people understand that you put effort into anything, you will get better at it. It makes it easier for people to understand that you can use humor in the right capacity. But guess what? You're going to mess things up. You're going to make mistakes. It's knowing where and when to make them so that you don't blow up your career or blow up a relationship in that process.
Or end up in HR's office.
Yeah, I think, career limiting moves are not a great idea for most people unless you really are done with the place. But even then, it's like, why? Like, do you want that? Most people would say no.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, that makes me think of Malcolm Gladwell, right? 10,000 hours
10,000
to
hours.
get mastery over any sort of task, right? So you got to eat shit for 10,000 hours until you can somewhat be good at doing a thing, which is repetition. Repetition is mastery, right?
Well, it is. And I hope you're not eating shit for all 10,000 hours, right? Hopefully it's like, a few hundred and some of it is positive and, applause or that was a great presentation or you were sharp up there. Because I think that 10,000 straight hours of failure might be pretty discouraging. It also might make you super resilient and super good at what you do. So there could be something there about just taking 10,000 hours of losses in a row. But maybe at that point, you need to change something.
Yeah, for sure. If you're not evolving and refining along that process, then yeah, there's definitely lost lessons that are chopping floor, that you're not capturing.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about boundaries, though. What boundaries exist, especially in humor? Because how can leaders really avoid? And this is the thing with positional power, right? You're the guy or girl that's in the head chief position. Everyone's eyeballs are on you. How do you avoid using too much sarcasm or humor that risks alienating people? Because I think about our neurodivergent colleagues who might interpret your tone way differently than others.
I appreciate this explicit call out because my son is autistic and, being the parent of a neurodivergent child is not the same as being neurodivergent myself, but it certainly makes me recognize that it is more difficult for some folks than for others to understand what are boundaries and to honor those boundaries. I think the easiest thing that makes it easier to identify those boundaries or recognize them is to just demonstrate you understand what's going on. And I think when you have credibility and trust, it does unlock the ability to use humor in certain situations. And this is the thing, where the boundaries are and how thick they are or consequences are, I can't tell you for every situation because there's no single absolute rule. But I think that if you don't know how things work, you've got to understand how to do your homework in advance. And this is the thing I tell every executive I've ever counseled, as well as every, rank and file individual contributor, which is do your homework before you ask someone from that group for their perspective. For example, we're celebrating Juneteenth. What's Juneteenth? If only there were a website you could just put a question into and find an answer to it. And people always give me the most kind of like snarky reactions like, oh, well, of course you'd say that. Yes, of course I'd say that. Go Google it. It's not hard. You're just being lazy. And I think more people would not acknowledge that, but they do that because there's just no urgency for them to go find the answer on their own. They need to have it spoon-fed. Like, you can just put it in ChatGPT. Oh, I don't want to pay for that. Google's free. You can go Google what Juneteenth is. And if it's something that's holding you back from that, ask yourself, what's holding you back? Because then you're getting to the real issue, like, oh, well, Juneteenth brings up memories of slavery and uncomfortable subjects. Yeah, it does. Do you understand what Juneteenth is? No, go learn. There's a story behind what Juneteenth means. And I think that we shouldn't avoid sarcasm or humor all the time. I think we should figure out how do we use it in the right way to engender trust or to demonstrate our knowledge or even ideally mastery of a subject. And I think you also have to think about in organizations, you may have certain boundaries that are set based on what the organization values or what the leadership has valued in the past. Some organizations are very radical candor focused or transparency focused. Others say stay in your lane, never challenge, never deviate from the status quo. So it's both a combination of expectation, what's rewarded or punished, and then ultimately, if you're going to use sarcasm or humor, is there a purpose to it? I don't do sarcasm or humor just to shock people, although occasionally I do that. I use it as a means of establishing the connection with the person that I understand the issue that we're talking about. So when I in my company, I helped to launch our first 5 employee resource groups, one for neurodivergent employees, one for our Black African American population, one for caregivers, which includes parents as well as those taking care of elders. We have a women's network, and we have an LGBT group. My usage of sarcasm or humor in each of those contexts has to be specific to the people who are leading my groups, but I had to earn their trust first before I could go forward with that sarcasm. And the good thing is that I have those relationships with those 5 teams now to do that. But if, for example, it's the first day and I start cracking, stereotype jokes or microaggression jokes, is that going to be good for our relationship? Some people might appreciate that, but a lot of folks would say, whoa, who are you? And why are you being like straight out of the gates with something potentially offensive?
Yeah, it's like a bull going through a china shop. It is very disastrous if that trust has not been earned. And I've seen it time and time again in many different corporate settings where somebody who comes in real hot with sarcasm and super dry humor, and no one really understands, whoa, what is happening? It feels very aggressive. It feels very I don't know, just like a peacock fluffing their feathers out all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that at the end of the day, it comes down to emotional intelligence. And that's everything that we've just been talking about. Reading the room, active listening skills, empathy, really understanding that those things are incredibly important to doing this right. Because if you just come in bombastically like a bit of a jerk in your sarcasm, guess what's going to happen? Over time, people are like, God, she is really difficult to work with. And I'm just going to go around that person to get the answer I need because, oof, she's a hot one, or whatever it is. And then, obviously that's a bomb that your approach has failed.
Well, and here's the funny thing. Like, I'm talking in a very logical, almost rigorous, like framework-driven mentality. I don't think about this when I go into rooms, right? And I'm lucky that it comes easy to me to be a little shameless or to make jokes and just when they fail, acknowledge it, or if I cross a line that I apologize. But I think about this. I absolutely agree. I was at a conference this past summer and I was talking to a few people I hadn't seen in over a year. And I said, I'm going through a separation right now because I've been going through a divorce for the last year. And I said, so I guess I won't be asking EY people for their advice. Now, that joke has layers because EY had a very public failed separation to separate their businesses. The EY people were like, oh, that's a bit of a dark joke because you're tossing into what we failed to do plus what you failed to do. I'm like, whoa. I didn't say I failed at my marriage, okay? It made for a really funny moment, though, because I wasn't actually offended. I made that joke for a purpose. And the EY folks were kind of half laughing, half crying. But see, it's like that is an example where if I make a joke about the fact that EY had a very public failed separation, most of the people I was talking to were not going to be upset by that. If I ran into the senior managing partner or the CEO, would I make that joke? Maybe not, because that might not be appreciated. Know your audience. Also, a little bit of self-deprecation. I brought up one of the most difficult things anyone can go through in life with my separation and divorce. So if anything, I'm like, really? You're going to care about a corporate separation when I'm struggling through my divorce? No. How do you like them apples? So, I put myself up there for a little bit of scrutiny, but I'm also like, I can take it. I think that, again, it's not the easiest thing to poke fun at oneself or to be vulnerable or to poke jokes like that. But I also like dark humor. I also like dark jokes. And, that's my style. So I feel like, again, what boundaries exist, you don't know until you cross one.
Yeah, I feel like this is the razor's edge. You and I talked about this offline, is that when the best comedians you can think of in the last 30, 40 years, they really do push that edge and find the dark humor in something because it really is true and relevant and needs to be uncovered. That's where, actual change comes from. But on my side, I'm the one that, is that sensitive person in the room that sometimes really struggles with sarcasm being, pushed towards me. And I just shut down is the truth. And I go, oh, I'm not into that. Ugh.
Well, and you hit on two things that are really important there, right? Again, knowing your audience, knowing that some people won't appreciate that. You can do humor, sarcasm, but if people shut down, does that serve what you're trying to do if you're trying to build a relationship with someone or work with someone? You also tapped into a powerful word around truth, because I remember, 18 years ago when I was starting to do some stand-up comedy, I went through a comedy college in San Francisco, and they taught me a really lovely lesson which applies to all of my life now, which is that truth is funny, but it has to be your truth generally. And I think that for telling jokes, that's true. It should be your story. Like I can't go tell Jerry Seinfeld's jokes, right? Because those aren't my jokes. But the idea around truth is that if it's true objectively, right, and you talk about it, it's important to get that idea out there, right? And I think that there are minefields around DEI of what you can and can't talk about, right? And I find that the inability to talk about things preserves the status quo, which makes it so that it stays uncomfortable. So when I get into meetings, I'm like, we're going to talk about things that will make everyone uncomfortable, okay? Gender bias, white supremacy. We're going to talk about things that are happening politically because they affect our well-being. So whether it's the current administration or policies of, brutal enforcement from ICE, like we have tough conversations because hiding from them doesn't do anyone any good. Talking about them allows us to establish what we think about it, what's happening, different perspectives that we're not aware of. And I'm different than a lot of folks in that I always seek out difference and I'm not afraid of it. And I'm hoping that over time, more people will become less afraid of difference, even though it really truly is an inherently human behavior.
Well, I think you did something really smart there by setting the stage. We're going to talk about very uncomfortable things in this next hour. That gives the audience, the room, the meeting room, an understanding of where we're headed as well. Yeah. So talk to me about like using humor to strengthen your credibility. I mean, especially rather than like undermine it, especially when senior leaders might perceive DEI work, I'm using air quotes, as too serious to laugh about.
I mean, you could even use humor in a way that doesn't directly talk about DEI work. You can always talk about it in the context of relative to other work, like, oh, this is going to be just as much fun as your compliance training, or this might be more fun than your compliance training, right? And like that's a joke. And some people might not laugh because they hate compliance training, which I hate compliance training, fair, right? Most people hate compliance training. But I think that when you establish that credibility we talked about earlier, you have perspective, you have knowledge, it does help make it easier for senior leaders to use humor in that context. Because again, you've built up that trust. You're able to reference things that you now know. And I think this comes into play, especially when you're talking to a different group or people from a different group, and you're acknowledging some of the things that have gone poorly for that group. And I'll give you an example, right? I'm second generation Chinese American, male, been in corporate my whole life. I have certainly a decent amount of privilege to my life and my upbringing. And also, I'm able to recognize that there are historical lessons from different groups that I wasn't exposed to as, a high school student or a grade school student, right? So when I am demonstrating knowledge of Tulsa or Rosewood, and by the way, if you don't know what those instances are relating to, go Google it, and you will find more and more examples of, in Black history that have just been utterly horrible to learn about. Just like if I were to tell you to learn about Tacoma or Los Angeles or Seattle with Chinese exclusion, right? And you'd say, I'd never heard about this. So again, that credibility gives me then the right to be like, well, at least this isn't Tacoma, and that's a dark joke too. But also we get to a place where if you understand what's led to here, you are better off for it. You have the ability to critically think. And I think that more people are just like, ignorance is bliss, la, 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 plugging their ears. I'm like, please don't do that. Because all that does is make it easy for you at the cost of everyone else.
Yeah. And Aaron, one of the things that just like I had an aha in this last bit, and it's so silly, but it's worth saying out loud. I think sometimes people lean on humor or sarcasm when they're doing the exact opposite of everything that you've just talked about. When they come into a meeting late, when they come in unprepared, they're flying off the cuff and they're just sort of, feeling a little bit insecure about maybe their position or what they're trying to get across in this meeting.
Yep.
And they use humor or sarcasm to kind of shield, if you will.
Yes.
I think what you're saying is completely different. And that just really clicked on for me in that moment.
I'm so glad you recognize this because I think when people use that humor in the moment to try to deflect and then they
Yeah.
catch themselves in the awkwardness, they create that bubble of awkwardness which permeates everything in that room.
And
Now,
makes it worse.
it does make it worse, right? Now, it's helpful for me to be a little shameless or a little loud or that to be my style because I don't worry about it as much, right? I don't create more. Well, I create awkwardness intentionally because I like awkwardness and I think it makes people better for it. But I think most people create awkwardness unintentionally, and that really defeats like what people know them for, or what they want to be known for, or what they're able to do. Because now, all of a sudden, Mary said something awkward in an attempt to defuse the situation and made it 10 times worse. That
Yeah.
sucks, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, bottom line, humor is not a crutch. It is a tool in your tool belt when you are prepared and show up as in your best, highest self in a meeting, in a conference room, in a pitch, in a sales meeting. Then you can infuse humor in the right way to effectively be a great storyteller, right?
Yeah, and I think it's important to call out, right? Like we've talked a little bit about comedy and humor. They're
Mm,
different things, even though they're related. Like comedy is trying to intentionally make people laugh. Humor is the ability to find something funny. And again, it's so unique because all of our experiences determine what we find humorous or what we find funny. And you have to make some assumptions because you don't know everything about everyone ever, right? But I think you have to figure out through experimentation what is appropriate and what's not for the circumstances. It's kind of like how people find themselves into certain jobs. If you started your career working for an accounting firm and you've only known that for 10 years, you have no basis for comparison. If tomorrow you got a job working in the circus, it would give you a dramatic comparison. Like, oh my God, my healthcare benefits suck in comparison. Oh my God, there's no 401k match here. Oh, but by the way, my makeup routine has gotten 10 times better and I've learned how to, ride a unicycle. Okay, you've got some very distinct contrasts there. And again, that experiential method is what I bring like my coaching clients through, my DEI, executive, like recipients of my counsel, and just anyone to say like, if you have perspective, it helps because relativity is important to understand. Is this more awkward or less awkward? Is this job a better fit or a worse fit? Is this team more welcoming or less welcoming? You need comparison, even though we all acknowledge that comparison is the thief of joy. You need some comparison to be able to understand what works for you and what doesn't.
and refine that tool over time.
Bingo.
That 10,000 hours of making it mastery.
Yep.
So, just to wrap up, what's one practical way an HR professional or a people leader can weave humor into everyday conversations about culture change, again, without making light of the issues?
I mean, I think that HR professionals are in a tough place because they're typically called upon to defuse a broken situation or a confrontation.
And toe the line.
Toe the line, right? I think you start by acknowledging the issue, right? Don't downplay it. Don't trivialize it. Do not immediately say, that's not what she's like, or that's not who he is, because that is a classic deflection I hear all the time in the space. I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You were going straight to, they haven't acted like that before, therefore they're absolved of any guilt. And I'm like, they may be innocent, but it doesn't account for the impact, right? So step into the battle, step into the conversation, especially with groups that you don't identify with. Be curious, right? I think more often than not, HR has earned its own negative reputation by immediately making judgment and siding with whatever side has more power or whatever will make the conversation go away more quickly. Because a lot of people, in my experience, in general, but especially in the HR function, are conflict averse. Like they don't go out seeking conflict. But the problem with trying to just get back to status quo and reduce that conflict is you don't resolve the underlying issue. The impact that someone has made on someone else, you're just sweeping under the rug by saying, oh, that's not who they are. Okay, well, I'm not a murderer, but if I hit someone with a car, the impact is someone's life is over. So impact over intent, not to say we don't include intent, but it has to be secondary to the impact.
So good. You guys, if you're listening to this episode right now, all the resources to what Aaron is talking about can be found over the show notes, thesimplifiers.com. That includes links to his LinkedIn, so you can get connected straight to Aaron. He's a very nice guy. You can connect with him, send him messages, tell him that you heard this episode, but also to his various websites, coachingaf.com, inclusionaf.com, and obviously to his Instagram as well. Now, are you doing some open mic stuff in New York City?
I'm just starting it. It's like I did some comedy this summer at a conference in front of 2,000 people, and it reminded me how much I love comedy and I love being on stage. So do I have a proper social media setup yet? No, right? Literally just set up my own account for comedy, but it has like 18 followers who are like my friends who think that I just changed my profile because I wanted to get away from them. No, for me, it's like, and I should also put out a caveat before I get fired or yelled at by people. Like, my opinions are my own. They do not reflect the company. See, the legal compliance training is strong. But I think it's like, I like to talk about a variety of topics, some of which are good for the corporate setting and some of which are good for the not corporate setting, the comedy club, the one drink minimum, Friday night, I need to get away from the corporate world. So yeah, hopefully in the coming weeks and months, there will be more opportunities to see me live in New York. If not, you want to hire me for your corporate sales kickoff, or you want someone to poke fun at your CEO, I'm very happy to be your resident loudmouth.
Awesome. So as we wrap up, there's a few questions we like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. Here we go, rapid fire. First and foremost, what's one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
So I'm reading Anti-Fragile, Things That Gain from Disorder. And Nassim Nicholas Taleb's book. I mean, he's written plenty of powerful books, and I'm only about like 10, 15% through it, right? But it got me thinking a lot about, can comedy be my mechanism to becoming anti-fragile? Can I get better through more rejection and more struggle so that the jokes that I do put out there land and make people laugh, uncontrollably?
And make them think and make them open up and have really powerful conversations.
Sure.
Right?
If you want growth, I'm just focused on the laughter. Let's just be a little bit more hedonic and basic, okay? Jeez.
So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I love this question because I practice active gratitude as much as possible. I live in New Jersey, and my kids live in Chicago with my ex. I am deeply grateful for the time that I do get with them because my son is 6, my daughter is turning 4 next week, end of September 2025 here. And it reminds me that I have things that are more important than some of the daily struggles or whiny complaints I have. Oh my God, they put too much sauce on my pasta. Aaron, shut up. Those are the important things to me, and I'm grateful for my 2 kids.
I love that. So, is there somebody in your network or just somebody who is in your orbit that you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on them, and who knows? Maybe one day we'll have them on the podcast. Who would that be?
Well, he's not in my orbit. He's someone I admire. So Zoran Mamdani, for many of you may know as a candidate for the mayor of New York City, I have come to admire just by listening to his perspective, his positions. One of the most intelligent politicians that I've ever heard. And I know people right now can't associate anything positive with politics or politicians, but I think he brings smart, thoughtful answers to intense questions, whether it's public policy related or other. And I just think he's a good representation of where we should get our political discourse to, which is just thoughtful, well-researched, informed, educated insights.
Love that. We will link him in the show notes as well. Again, go to thesimplifiers.com. You can find all the details for this episode and for him. So I'll end here. Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and they work in DEI. They have probably been pretty scared over the last 12 months that their job is going to be eliminated anytime now, especially if they're based here in the States. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
I had to resist the temptation to go super dark, like it could be worse. But here's the thing. Focus on what you can control. I've been a big reader of Stoicism over the last 3-4 years, and I really do believe that we worry too much about things that are beyond our control. I had those worries myself, right? Is the industry going to collapse? Am I going to be persecuted by this administration for fighting for inclusion? Which, if I'm going to be, I'll fight that fight and I will go down swinging, proverbially. But I think that we need to focus on what we can control. And if it's beyond our control right now, move on. There are other ways to get through this life without worrying about everything.
Aaron, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you for your time today.
Likewise, Mary. Thanks for letting me be here.